An African girl lost her name in the chains of slavery. 60 scars marked her body forever. But one day, that same woman would kiss the hands of her tormentors. East Africa in 1870 was a territory where humanity had lost all meaning. The slave markets of Khartoum and El Obeid teemed with the trade of souls, while Arab traffickers penetrated ever deeper into the lands of Darfur, sowing terror in villages that vanished overnight. In this world without mercy, where human bodies were branded with red-hot iron as cattle are branded, where children were torn from their mothers' arms never to return, a story was being born that would defy all human logic. A story of darkness so dense it seemed impenetrable. But God writes straight with crooked lines. And in a small village near Mount Aguilarai, beneath the same African sky that witnessed so many atrocities, a heart was beating, destined to prove that no darkness, however deep, can extinguish the light that the Creator places within His creatures. Around the year 1869, in the region of Darfur, in western Sudan, a baby girl came into the world within a respected family. Her father was the brother of the village chief of Olgosa, near Mount Aguilarai, and her home overflowed with life. 3 brothers and 2 sisters surrounded her with affection. She was a twin, and with her sister she shared that unique bond known only to those who have dwelt together in the same mother's womb. The first years of her life unfolded in the sweetness of an African childhood, the warmth of the red earth beneath her bare feet, the laughter around the family fire, the unshakable security of knowing she was loved. Many years later, as an elderly nun in Italy, her eyes would grow moist, remembering that lost happiness, that paradise from which she was cast out with no possible return. One morning in 1877, when she was approximately 7 or 8 years old, the girl was walking through the fields with a friend when 2 figures emerged from the brush. They were slave traders, hunters of human beings who ravaged the region. One of them drew a knife and pressed it against her companion's throat, while the other seized her with brutal force. The terror she experienced in that instant was so absolute, so devastating, that her mind shattered in an act of survival. She forgot her own name, that name her parents had spoken with love, that her mother had whispered while nursing her, that her twin sister had called out in their games, was buried forever beneath layers of unfathomable trauma. Her captors, with the refined cruelty of those who trade in human souls, mockingly renamed her Bakhita, which in Arabic means fortunate. Over the following 12 years, Bakhita was sold at least 5 times, passing from hand to hand like just another piece of merchandise in the markets of El Obeid and Khartoum. Each new master brought new horrors. In the house of a Turkish general, she suffered the most atrocious torture of all. 60 incisions were cut into her chest, abdomen, and right arm, following ritual patterns, and salt was rubbed into the open wounds so the scars would remain visible for life, an indelible mark of ownership. The pain was so intense that she lost consciousness repeatedly, and she spent an entire month unable to move. Those scars would accompany her to the grave, a bodily map of suffering that no human words can describe. Yet in the midst of this endless night, something remained intact in the deepest part of her being. When she gazed at the African sky, when she watched the sun pour its gold over the savannah, or the moon bathe the desert nights in silver, a question rose from her wounded heart. Who could be the owner of such beautiful things? Without knowing it, the little slave was already seeking the one who would one day find her. The year 1883 marked an unexpected turning point in Bakhita's life. In the markets of Khartoum, Italian consul Callisto Legnani purchased her along with another slave. For the first time in nearly a decade of captivity, Bakhita experienced something she had forgotten existed: human kindness. The Legnanis did not treat her as property, but with a consideration that deeply bewildered her. When in 1885 the family decided to return to Italy, fleeing the Sudanese political instability, Bakhita embarked with them toward Genoa. Traveling with her was also Mimina, the young daughter of Augusto Michieli, an Italian merchant and friend of the consul who had entrusted the child to the Legnani's care. The Mediterranean stretched before Bakhita's eyes like a blue immensity separating two worlds. Behind her lay the continent of her torments. Ahead, an unknown land where, without her suspecting it, the encounter that would give meaning to all her suffering awaited her. The following years passed in the Michieli household, first in Genoa and then in Zianigo, near Venice. Bakhita cared for Mimina with maternal devotion, pouring into that Italian girl all the love she had been unable to give or receive during her stolen childhood. But in 1888, when the Michielis had to travel on business to the Red Sea, they temporarily entrusted Mimina and Bakhita to the Institute of the Canossian Sisters in Venice. It was there, within the walls of that Venetian convent, where the Master of the Stars finally answered the question Bakhita had carried in her heart since those nights in the African desert. The religious sisters, with infinite patience, spoke to her of the God who had created the sun, the moon, the stars, and herself. They explained that this God had loved her since before she was born, that he had been with her in every moment of her slavery, that every tear of hers had been gathered in heaven. Bakhita listened with her soul hanging in the balance, and something that had remained dormant in the deepest part of her being awakened with unstoppable force. Years later, she would confess, "When they explained to me who God was, I experienced a mysterious strength that was already in my heart without my knowing it." January 9th, 1890, became the most luminous day in the life of this woman who had known such darkness. In the Basilica of Santa Maria della Salute in Venice, from the hands of Cardinal Patriarch Domenico Agostini, Bakhita received baptism, confirmation, and First Communion simultaneously. She chose to be called Giuseppina Margherita Fortunata, Josephine Margaret Fortunate, transforming the cruel nickname her captors had imposed on her into a name of grace and redemption. She, who had been called fortunate as a bloody mockery, now truly became the most fortunate of creatures. She had found the love she had been seeking without knowing it. But then came the trial that would reveal the depth of her conversion. Mrs. Michieli returned from Africa, demanding Mimina and Bakhita to take them back with her to Sudan. Bakhita, with a firmness that astonished all who knew her as gentle and submissive, flatly refused. "I am certain that God wants me here," she declared with serene determination. The case reached the Italian courts, and on November 29, 1889, the king's prosecutor issued a historic ruling. Slavery did not legally exist in Italy. Bakhita had never been legally a slave on Italian soil, and therefore she was completely free to choose her destiny. For the first time in her approximately 21 years of life, Josephine Bakhita was master of herself. And with the freedom the world offered her, she chose total surrender, to consecrate herself forever to the one who had rescued her from the darkness. On December 7th, 1893, Josephine Bakhita crossed the threshold of the Canossian novitiate in Venice, leaving behind forever the world that had caused her so much suffering to embrace a life of cloister and service. 3 years later, on December 8th, 1896, the feast of the Immaculate Conception, she pronounced her perpetual vows with a joy that moved all who witnessed the ceremony. The former slave became a bride of Christ, and on her face shone a peace that no past tribulation had managed to extinguish. She was assigned to the convent in Schio, in the province of Vicenza, where she would remain for the next 50 years of her life. Her duties were the humblest in the community, tending the door, caring for the sacristy, helping in the kitchen, mending her sister's habits. Simple tasks, almost invisible, which she performed with such delicacy and devotion that they transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. The doorway of the Schio convent soon became a place of spontaneous pilgrimage. The townspeople came with any excuse just to see the Madre Moretta, as they affectionately called her, to receive a word from her, a blessing, a smile that seemed to radiate directly from heaven. Bakhita welcomed everyone with identical tenderness, the ragged beggar and the distinguished gentleman, the mischievous child and the ailing elder, the ashamed sinner and the exemplary devotee. In every human face she recognized the image of the God who had rescued her, and to each one she offered the same unconditional love she herself had received. During the First World War, when the convent was transformed into a military hospital, Bakhita cared for the wounded soldiers with maternal concern, cleaning their wounds, holding their hands in moments of agony, whispering prayers beside the dying. She, who knew intimately the suffering of a tortured body, knew exactly what comfort those men shattered by shrapnel needed. Religious obedience imposed upon her a cross particularly heavy for her naturally reserved temperament, traveling throughout Italy, giving testimony of her life to promote missionary vocations. For Bakhita, speaking about herself before crowds constituted a true interior martyrdom. Nevertheless, she obeyed without complaint, and her simple words, spoken with that African accent she never entirely lost, deeply moved her listeners. She recounted the horrors of her slavery without bitterness, described the tortures she suffered without resentment, and when she reached the moment of her conversion, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. In 1910, at the request of her superiors, she dictated her autobiography to a sister in the community, thus bequeathing to posterity the first-hand testimony of her extraordinary spiritual journey. As the years advanced, illnesses began to multiply upon that body already so battered. The 60 scars on her chest and abdomen caused her chronic pain that intensified with the damp cold of northern Italy. Bronchitis, asthma, and arthritis progressively undermined her strength, but never was she heard to complain. When a sister asked how she was feeling, she invariably responded with a smile. "The Master has given me so much that these small sufferings are nothing compared to what he endured for me on the cross." During the years of the Second World War, when Allied bombings spread panic among the civilian population, Bakhita remained an anchor of serenity in the midst of the storm. While sirens wailed and explosions shook the convent's foundations, she repeated with unshakable calm, "Do not be afraid, sisters. The Master watches over us. Our Lady protects us." Her faith was not an escape from reality, but a certainty forged in the crucible of sufferings that would have destroyed any less tempered soul. She had crossed through hells that those bombs could not equal, and she had discovered that in the heart of all darkness beats the presence of a God who never abandons his own. The young novices listened to her with reverence, and in her words they found the strength to face the terror of those times. Bakhita had become, without intending it, a spiritual mother to an entire community, a beacon of hope for an Italy devastated by war, a living testimony that love is stronger than death. The twilight of Josephine Bakhita's earthly life was a gradual descent toward eternity, marked by physical suffering that she welcomed as a final gift to offer her Lord. From 1943 onward, her health deteriorated alarmingly. The chronic bronchitis that had accompanied her for decades worsened until it became a constant torment that stole her breath. Asthma attacked her without warning, leaving her gasping and exhausted. Arthritis deformed her joints to the point of preventing her from walking, and in 1947 she became definitively bedridden, first in a wheelchair and finally confined to the bed from which she would never rise again. The sisters who attended her marveled at her heroic patience. That body which had endured the burning irons of the slave traders, the chains of the slave markets, and the damp cold of 50 Italian winters, was now slowly wasting away without a single word of complaint ever escaping her lips. During the feverish nights of her final weeks, the past burst into her consciousness with the force of a living nightmare. The religious sisters who kept vigil beside her bed listened in awe as Bakhita relived the horrors of her stolen childhood. "The chains are too heavy," she would murmur in a broken voice, writhing between the sheets as if trying to free herself from invisible bonds. "Please, loosen them a little. They're hurting me." Other times she would cry out words in African languages that no one understood, or weep calling for a mother whose face she barely remembered. Those young sisters, who only knew suffering from hearsay, shed silent tears at the spectacle of so much accumulated pain emerging from the subconscious of the dying elderly woman. But then, suddenly, Bakhita's tormented face would transform into an expression of supernatural bliss. "Look," she would whisper, with her eyes fixed on some invisible point on the ceiling. "The Madonna is coming to visit me. How beautiful she is." And a child's smile would illuminate her withered features. The last days of January and the first days of February 1947 passed in an alternation of agony and ecstasy that left an indelible impression on all who accompanied her. In her moments of lucidity, Bakhita consoled the sisters who wept around her. "Don't be sad for me," she would tell them, taking their hands with her fingers deformed by arthritis. "I am going to the Master. He is waiting for me." When the superior asked if she felt fear before imminent death, Bakhita responded with that simplicity that had been the hallmark of her entire spiritual life. "Why should I be afraid? I am going to meet the owner who has loved me so much. All my life he has taken care of me. Now I am going to see him face to face." On February 8, 1947, the feast of St. John of Matha, founder of the Trinitarians dedicated to the redemption of captives, at 10 minutes past 8 in the evening, Josephine Bakhita breathed her last. Her final words were an invocation to that heavenly mother who had come to visit her in her delirium. "Our Lady, Our Lady." She was approximately 78 years old and had traveled a path that had led her from the chains of the slave markets to the arms of eternal love. News of her death spread through Shio and the surrounding towns with the speed of the wind. Before dawn the following day, a crowd had gathered at the convent doors, demanding to see their Madre Moreta one last time. For 3 days, an unceasing river of humanity filed past her body. Elderly people who remembered her words of comfort during the wars, mothers who had entrusted their sick children to her, children who had known her at the Porter's Lodge and were now adults with children of their own. Everyone wanted to touch her hands, kiss those feet that had once dragged chains, contemplate one last time that black face that had radiated so much light. Many collected the petals from the flowers adorning her coffin as relics, convinced that the holiness of that extraordinary woman somehow remained in everything she had touched. The Bishop of Vicenza, upon witnessing that spontaneous manifestation of popular veneration, spoke the words that would prove prophetic. "The people have already canonized her. Rome will only have to confirm what these faithful already know in their hearts." The official recognition of Josephine Bakhita's sanctity followed a path that, while lengthy by ecclesiastical standards, was extraordinarily swift if we consider the magnitude of what the Church had to discern. In 1959, barely 12 years after her passage into glory, the Bishop of Vicenza formally inaugurated the diocesan process of beatification. Testimonies accumulated by the hundreds, sisters from her community who had lived alongside her for decades, faithful from Schio, who treasured memories of her words and gestures, priests who had witnessed her life of prayer, doctors who could find no natural explanation for certain healings attributed to her intercession. On December 1, 1978, Pope John Paul II, that pontiff who had known firsthand the weight of totalitarian oppression, signed the decree declaring the heroic nature of Josephine Bakhita's virtues, elevating her to the rank of venerable. The Polish Pope recognized in that African woman a sister in suffering and in hope. The beatification took place on May 17, 1992, in a ceremony that gathered thousands of pilgrims from every continent in St. Peter's Square, but especially from Africa. Delegations from Sudan, from Eritrea, from Ethiopia, from Uganda, and from so many other African nations joined together in a song of thanksgiving, that resonated with the ancestral rhythms of the land that had seen Bakhita's birth. John Paul II, visibly moved, proclaimed that this woman who had been bought and sold as merchandise was now being raised to the altars as a model of human dignity redeemed by grace. 8 years later, on October 1st, 2000, in the solemn context of the Great Jubilee of the Incarnation, the same pontiff definitively inscribed the name of Josephine Bakhita in the catalogue of saints. In the Canonization homily, John Paul II spoke words that condensed the universal meaning of that extraordinary life. In Saint Josephine Bakhita, we find an eminent witness of Christian hope. She discovered the great hope. I am definitively loved, and whatever happens to me, I am awaited by this love. Today, the incorrupt body of Saint Josephine Bakhita rests in the Church of the Holy Trinity in Schio, where it continues to draw pilgrims from around the world. She has been proclaimed patron saint of victims of human trafficking, a scourge that, far from disappearing, affects more than 40 million human beings across the planet today. She is also patron saint of Sudan, that land that witnessed her birth and her suffering, and that now venerates her as its most illustrious daughter. Her feast is celebrated every February 8th, the anniversary of her death, and on that day Catholic communities throughout Africa sing hymns in her honor while the bells of Schio ring out, calling the faithful to remember their Madre Moreta. But beyond the titles and liturgical celebrations, Bakhita remains a living sign of a truth the world needs to hear. No chain forged by man can imprison a soul that God has chosen to set free. Her existence demonstrates that authentic forgiveness is possible even in the face of the most atrocious injuries, that true freedom does not depend on external circumstances, but on interior adherence to the supreme good, that divine love can transform the most abject suffering into a wellspring of blessings for future generations. Saint Josephine Bakhita, the nameless child who found her definitive identity in the arms of the Heavenly Father, continues to speak to the hearts of all who suffer, reminding them that they are infinitely loved. When we contemplate the life of Josephine Bakhita, we find ourselves before a mystery that surpasses all human understanding. A child torn from her home, stripped even of her name, branded with hot iron as if she were cattle, sold again and again in markets where human dignity held no value whatsoever. And yet, that same woman could affirm at the end of her days that she would kiss the hands of those who tortured her, because without that Calvary, she would never have found Christ. This is not passive resignation nor superficial forgetting. It is the definitive victory of love over hatred, of light over the densest darkness. Bakhita reveals to us that there exists a freedom no chain can take away, a peace no executioner can destroy, a love no suffering can extinguish. She, who knew the deepest abyss of human cruelty, became a luminous witness of divine mercy. Her life proclaims to all the oppressed of the earth that God has not abandoned them, that every tear is gathered, that every wound will be healed. The Master of the Stars, the one she sought while gazing at the African sky, awaited her at the end of the road to wipe away every tear and transform her scars into radiant glory. Saint Josephine Bakhita, Virgin and Witness of Hope, pray for us.